Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another chapter here from the wonderful book Strange Monsters and Great Searches by George Laycock. This one being chapter 7. In this case, it has to do with another monster, a jet-propelled one that is apparently found along the Atlantic coast. So once again, another sea monster of sorts, this one, though, once again, also being a real life animal. In this case, potentially a giant squid. So you've definitely heard those stories, right, associated with the infamous giant squid. So much so, in fact, that they've been chronicled for hundreds of years. Some of the older drawings, in fact, showcase those giant squids wrapping themselves around these boats traveling throughout the sea, creating so much destruction. They definitely take on a legendary status, and even to this day, the sightings of them remain quite rare. But every now and then, they will pop up somewhere, and you'll see a viral clip associated with them. But have we yet to see the largest one out there? I still think there's one that's bound to be out there that's much huger than ever seen. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this chapter here. I'll give my own thoughts and opinions. Let me know what you guys and gals think with regards to this infamous creature, something that has again remained very, very elusive. So, again, chapter 7, here's what it says. One has only to close his eyes to imagine the gentle swelling of the midnight sea. So thick is the darkness that the thin line between sky and water is gone. The wind has gentled and died, the seas lie glassy. For the castaway adrift in a small boat, what form would be the most frightening monster imaginable to take at such an hour? Look over the side and look into the depths. There below, shapeless and changing in form, it moves slowly. Around its body there is a cold glow. The phosphorescent monster slowly takes shape as it rises towards the surface beneath the boat. What form of life could this be? Such a creature must not be real at all, but simply born of imagination. Its eyes are giant lenses 10 inches across. It has a body and a head which seem formed all in one strange, pulpy lump. At the back of the long body is a tail, shaped like the tip of a spear, but the head is the most frightening part of all. In front of those eyes, the face separates itself into 10 long, boneless arms, each curling and twisting in different directions as if feeling the sea for prey. Two of the arms are much longer than the others. They reach far ahead into the water, exploring, touching, searching. Along the other side of each fleshy arm are rows of suction cups, some as big as saucers and capable of clamping onto some hapless prey and holding it tightly long enough to bring it into its mouth. There, the prey, lost in that jungle of entangling arms, is crunched between horny plates and then swallowed. What if this monstrous apparition were to slip one of these giant tentacles up and over the little boat drifting on the ocean's dark surface? This, we are assured, could happen. Such creatures as we have described do live in the ocean depths. Some readers will recall from the laboratory sessions of biology courses that the creature here described is very much like a squid. Now, most squid are small, but many a small animal, when viewed under a magnifying lens, then becomes a monster. The squid, lying inert in the biology laboratory, awaiting the student's scalpel, is harmless enough in spite of its strange shape. From tip to tip, it may measure 8 inches and be about 2 inches across the body. The flimsy tentacles of this little sea creature now seem harmless. Such average sized squid are collected by the millions in nets along the Atlantic coast. They are sometimes sold as bait to fishermen. This saltwater animal is without a skeleton, a member of the cephalopods. The cephalopods are creatures that have no external shells and usually have the mouth surrounded with a circle of arms. One cousin of the squid is the octopus, but the squid is a speedy character compared with its cousin, the octopus. While the octopus crawls about the rocks seeking prey, the squid cruises the open waters, chasing them whenever he chooses to eat. He can quickly overtake various species of fish. The squid has two speeds, fast and slow, depending on whether he moves forward or backwards. He travels forward at slow speeds by the movement of fins, but when the squid goes into reverse, he employs the principle of jet propulsion. Water taken in is then forced with such speed that its torpedo-shaped body rockets backward to the sea. If the squid is pursued, it escapes by this high-speed procedure. Meanwhile, it sends out not plain transparent sea water, but a cloudy mass of black ink, a murky curtain that hides its escape route. As we have said, there's nothing truly frightening about the average little squid, especially when it lies dead upon the laboratory table. But over the ages, there have been reports of squids so large that they have taken people for food, and these reports cannot be ignored in any discussion of monsters. Centuries ago, sailors returning from their voyages spoke of such monsters of the sea. Often they were ignored or ridiculed. Men still ridicule monster stories altogether. We tend to believe so strongly in our own full knowledge that there is little room for admitting new creatures, especially if they are unusual in size, shape, or form. Learned men have sometimes insisted that unless they already knew of such a creature, it simply could not exist. This, as Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans explains so aptly in the authoritative book In the Wake of the Sea Serpents, was for so long years the fate of the giant squid. During the 1700s, Eric Pontoppidan spoke of a giant sea creatures in his book The Natural History of Norway. He spoke of objects protruding from the surface of the sea and said, "It seems these are the creature's arms, and it is said, if they were to lay hold of the largest man of war, they would pull it down to the bottom. After this monster has been on the surface of the water a short time, it begins slowly to sink again, and then the danger is as great as before because the motion of this sinking causes such a swell in the sea and such an eddy or whirlpool that it draws everything downward with it." Over the years, men of the sea carried back other tales of strange giant beasts cruising the depths. Men of science continued to grin and then shake their heads in disbelief. Gradually, however, bits of evidence more concrete were being offered. In the autumn of 1861, a French naval craft in the North Atlantic encountered an island of flesh floating on the surface. The ship's captain, having little else to do at the time and being curious as well, decided that he would capture the slowly moving creature. Guns were ready, firing began, but nothing could penetrate that slippery, leathery covering. Projectiles sank in, bounced back, and then slid off into the sea. This can be frustrating to the captain of a gunboat, but there was still one more weapon, the harpoon. As the ship closed on the creature, swimming slowly because of a probable sickness, the harpooner aimed and then released the weapon. The point was deeply embedded in the sack-like body. Finally, when the animal had been dragged closer to the ship, its flesh was pierced again and a line run through the back end of the body. Next, the crew began winching the massive weight upward towards the deck. The line, however, cut through the flesh like a thread done through jello, and it appeared that the beast would slip back into the depths. To prevent this, a loop was thrown around the tail fin, and although the tail fin broke from the body under the force of the winch, the crew did manage to bring about 40 pounds of the tail aboard. The evidence was taken eventually to the French Academy of Sciences. So what had the men aboard the gunboat seen? They knew all right what they had found, whether anyone cared to believe it or not. It was a giant squid. From the end of its tentacles to the tip of its other end, it measured perhaps 24 feet in length, with a body alone that was perhaps 18 feet long. It floated there in plain view before the crew. This was still not as large as a giant squid is likely to grow. In 1847, one of the papers that had been read at a meeting of the Society of Scandinavian Naturalists concerned the giant squid. 6 years later, with the subject still very much on his mind, the author of the paper heard of a giant squid that had washed up on the beach. A squid, once it runs aground, is helpless, no matter how much it exercises its jet power. Without the sea to support its bulk, it struggles until it perishes. A portion of the grounded giant reached the laboratory of the scientist who further described it and then gave it a scientific name, Archaeopteryx monachus. Stories of monsters, like stories of any kind, have the tendency to change when passed from person to person. Few storytellers have ever been known to shrink a monster. Perhaps stories of the giant squid pulling themselves from the sea on dark nights and then crawling into the rigging of ships toppling and sinking them are fiction. But there can be no question that the biggest of the squid reaches weights that total many tons. One of the largest of recorded giant squid washed up on a beach in 1924. Much of the mutilated specimen was gone, but the fact that it possessed 10 arms confirmed its identity. The body, which was 9 feet thick, would have been much higher, even lying on its side, than the ceiling of an average room. Scientists believe this specimen to have been more than 100 feet long, not measuring the two long tentacles. From tip to tip, measuring the two long tentacles, it might have stretched through the sea for more than 200 feet, two-thirds the length of a football field. There is a more recent story of a giant squid that took an entire ship into its grasp. One night, the squid climbed upon the ship of the side. The captain found the ends of its tentacles along the deck. One tentacle grasped the ship's stern. Then the captain walked over to the other end of his ship, and there was another tentacle. The ship was 175 feet long. Dr. Ann Biter, formerly of the Cambridge University Zoology Department, has said that such a creature would have a body of at least 25 feet long. Dr. Biter also added that she believed the story and told other scientists that the ship's officer had an excellent reputation as a careful observer and accurate reporter of what he saw at sea. This squid would have a reach of more than 200 feet. There are apparently authentic reports of giant squid capturing men. The fate of the unfortunate men or man can be assumed. The squid has no reason for capturing anything except to eat it. Divers must sometimes think of these stories as they explore the depths, and so must all who are adrift in a small craft at sea. Sailors have reported saving themselves by quickly chopping off the groping tentacles that reach out onto the sea and into the fishing boats. And then that's it. That's everything associated with Chapter 7, Jet Propelled Monster, from the book Strange Monsters and Great Searches by George Laycock. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about that here. So as you can see, the whole chapter was basically dedicated to the infamous giant squid. I was surprised at some of the lengths described with some of those encounters too. So yes, the average squid is just a little tiny squid, like the ones you've seen, let's see, at the zoo or anywhere else. I'm sorry, not a zoo, at the aquatic locations, or maybe even out there in the sea. And then, of course, being served up on plates and so on. But there are infamous squids that are much, much larger, giant squids. Nowadays, there's viral clips that showcase something. Usually it's a boat that happens to have a little mini camera attached to its side somewhere. And then it tends to periodically, whenever the boat doesn't even realize, whoever's there fishing, they don't realize that a giant squid is roaming about in the waters just beneath them, but the camera catches it, and you can see some large body associated with that giant squid. But there are tales, of course, of much, much larger ones, as the story described here, and as I mentioned earlier, infamous tales associated with sea travelers, those that are out there traveling during the couple hundred year back out there into the western Atlantic areas, and then there they are, their ship essentially being wrapped around by a giant squid who sees the boat, or within the boat itself, the potential chance to eat, like something involving the people or other cargo that it has there. But yeah, the giant squid, as you saw in some of these encounters here, well, the most fascinating one happened to be the last one. The idea that there was a ship that was already 175 feet long. That's how long it measured, and that was coming from the captain himself, who was again cited as having reputable character. And so he in turn saw the end of one of those tentacles wrapped around one end of the ship, and then at the very far end of the 175-foot boat on the other side, there was the other tentacle. Again, 175 foot long. Unless there were happened to be two squid, one on one end, one on the other, it remained that it was the same squid. So it gives you an idea of how big it was. And it was estimated to be over 200 feet long. Can you imagine that? And the idea that they could still be growing even larger out there, that there's larger ones, maybe even several hundred feet tall. They just happen to be roaming in the depths of the sea themselves. Truly, truly the stuff of nightmares. If you ever run into one of those, you have no chance whatsoever. Absolutely no chance. I remember a buddy I used to work with years back. Back then, I was working at a fast food place, and he was talking about one of his friends who was working at, I believe, an oil rig, somewhere around there, like one of those rigs that was out there in the sea that at one point involved that buddy having to go underwater, like to fix something associated with it, one of those cables, something like that. And he was telling him that at one point when he was down there, and it gets dark down there, of course, because there's very little light. He stated that there was something that moved so fast that it caused the waters around him to basically propel him, like almost as there was one big giant wave that was caused by whatever was moving so fast down there. He said he never got a chance to see what it was, but it must have been gigantic because of the wave. He just happened to be holding on to something that was keeping him there in place, and so he didn't get swept away. But he said it was very, very memorable. Again, he never saw exactly what it was, but it makes you wonder if I'm tying 2 plus 2 here, was it something along the lines of a giant squid? And the frustrating part is there's little to no evidence associated with these creatures, partly because unless they happen to come all the way to the surface, right place, right time, where someone happens to catch evidence of them, the only other evidence really is when they wash ashore. And that's only if that happens. If not, basically the bodies associated with them, those cephalopod bodies, no bones, nothing whatsoever. They just all disintegrate. They just basically rot away at the bottom of the sea. So who knows? There could be something again out there that's hundreds of feet long and we'll never ever know its existence, because when it dies out, then it'll essentially just go to the bottom of the ocean floor and be swept away into nothing. I remember reading somewhere too, there's a theory that with these giant sea animals, or whatever they're called out there, cryptids, whatever, like they can basically grow forever. They just happen to be nature takes its course. Like in other words, they eventually die out due to hunger, or they die out because they are in turn eaten by something else. But in a perfect situation, if that creature were left as is and was able to just keep on living each day, eating to a satisfactory level with no harm or danger surrounding it, it could potentially keep growing forever. So makes you wonder again what sizes there are out there. But in any case, that is chapter 7, Jet-Propelled Monster, involving the giant squid. Let me know what you guys and gals think with regards to this particular story, this particular chapter, any other entries I might have missed, something information that's important associated with the information on giant squids. Post it below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.